Good morning. A few days ago, the famous British atheist Richard Dawkins gave an interview in which he said that he would describe himself as a cultural Christian, and he kind of lamented the fact that England was kind of becoming overrun by Islam. And he said, while he doesn't really share the beliefs of Christianity, and he hopes that others don't share the beliefs of Christianity and cease to share the beliefs of Christianity, that he likes hymns and he likes the parish churches and cathedrals, and it would be a shame to see all of those go, which is just about the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Because if you don't have the people in the church, and you don't believe in the guy that the hymns are about, Jesus Christ is risen today, it just doesn't make any sense. But to kind of look at the aesthetics of Christianity and to look at the aesthetics, particularly of that kind of high church Anglican thing, you look and it's like, okay, this is beautiful. We have all the smells and bells and everything and the nice vestments, but we don't actually really believe in anything, which really is a wonderful summation of Anglicanism. But it just kind of got me thinking, like, what a strange way to live life. I don't believe in God, but I want all this stuff that comes from belief in God. I call myself a cultural Christian, yet I reject and eschew the very culture that Christianity built. I call myself a cultural Christian, but I reject Christian culture. It's a strange thing. It's a strange time in which we live. It's a strange world. And it's really kind of a rejection of God. It's a rejection of self, of who we are. It's a rejection of the incarnation. The first reading, Peter speaks about baptism, right? That in baptism we are baptized into Christ. We die with Christ and we rise with Christ. It's a simultaneous thing. We don't physically die because Christ physically died for us so that we didn't have to. All of us one day will physically die, but we've already had that spiritual death and resurrection take place in our baptism. And so then Jesus, after the resurrection, to show us that indeed he has risen, he appears to his disciples several times. This is after the encounter on the road to Emmaus, and the disciples are back and they're discussing. We encounter Jesus, and then he appears to him. And what does he do when he appears to him? He says, let's eat breakfast. Right? After he said, look, I'm not a ghost. Here's my flesh and my bone. You can see the wounds in my hands and my feet and my side. I'm hungry. Let's have breakfast. It highlights the humanity of Christ. Highlights that he came to share in our humanity. And so when we think about Christianity, when we think about baptism, having died and risen with Christ in baptism, having encountered the risen Lord, having been made one with him, having been made part of his body, entering into a unique relationship with Christ, we can't just simply look at all the trappings of Christianity and say, that's nice, it's very pretty. But rather, it has to transform our lives. It has to change how we interact with the world. It has to change how we interact with one another. It has to change the way that we think. It has to change everything that we do. In the good times in life, in the bad times in life, in the difficult times in life, Christianity changes who we are. And in doing so, it builds up that kind of kingdom of God here on earth, that culture of Christendom. We live in a time in which that's being stripped away, being torn apart. There's a few vestiges of Christendom left over, right? There's the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona that still isn't finished, that somehow managed to survive through the 70s and 80s, and it even survived through communism and all of that bad stuff, and they continue to build it. Maybe they didn't try to make it ugly because it's so modern. It's a strange, I haven't seen it in person yet, but it's such a strange concept because it's this like traditional form of the church, but with all this modern sort of, what style of art and architecture did Gaudi do? Not, I don't know, just modernism, I guess. It's very, very strange. You look in France, right, in Paris, the church there who, the eldest daughter of the church is France, where the gospel first went from Rome, and the church is on life support there. And then, Notre Dame burnt, and they went to rebuild and to fix, and let's make it modern. No, it's our cultural heritage. It has to look just as it did. And we look and we kind of see those vestiges of Christendom, but yet people still, they want to say, but let's make it more about us. Let's make it more about how I feel. Even think of our church music. People are always on me about the church music. What's with the 13th century doom and gloom, Dracula's castle music that we have at church? They said, it's about God, right? And it's about the things of God. It's not about us, right? It's not about gathering us in. The fourth verse of that hymn is very strange. It says something like, here in this place, not in some heaven light years away, and not in the darkness of buildings confining. And it's like, this is exactly the modernism that is choking out Christendom, is saying, we don't need those buildings confining. We don't need to worry about heaven that's light years away, as if it's literally a Star Wars thing, using Star Wars language. But even the way that we focus on how the Mass is celebrated, how the Mass is offered, that it's about God. It's not about us. We're participants in it, but we're participants at the foot of Calvary. We're participants much in the same way that Mary and the other Mary and the other Mary and St. John at the foot of the cross, much how they participated. And so when we ask ourselves, when we ask ourselves, how do we respond to the kind of cultural crisis that rejects Christianity? How do we respond to the world that's so gracias? This pollen is killing me. How do we respond to just the fallen world? We respond with the resurrection. We respond with saying there is a God who made us, who, after we messed up, took on our flesh. He came to be like us. He died to save us. He rose from the dead, and he's in heaven waiting for us. And we have to tell people that. And people have forgotten that, right? Because Christendom is no longer the thing. It's almost like we've gone back to the beginning, like we're in the early apostolic time, and we have to go out like St. Peter and Paul and the apostles and go out and go to the pagan masses, right, who just love themselves and they love what they've created. The Romans, gosh, they were such a decadent people. How could that ever fall? We have to go out to them and we have to proclaim this bold idea of Christ. Not just taking for granted and assuming that everybody's heard of Christ and that everybody knows Christ. Yeah, sure, people know Christianity and those crazy people, but rather to recognize that Christ is a real person. There's this very interesting phenomenon taking place right now among Gen Z, the Zoomers, right, who are crazy, right? They're the TikTok people. They're the kids that ate Tide Pods. Right, and they're going to run our country one day. And we're like, gosh, those dumb Zoomers. But yet, as they kind of see through the progression of generations, and they kind of see the emptiness of life, as people kind of recognize just the loneliness, the depression, as people recognize that all the stuff that we've been told for decades about how great we are, it isn't coming to fruition. So many of them are turning to Christianity. And they look and they kind of look at Protestantism and they're like, well, that's really just basically a result of all the modern stuff anyway. And they return to ancient Christianity and they come and they find Christ. And then we look and we say, why are these young people? They come to church and then they encounter Christ and they desire Christianity and they live it in such a strange way, right? They start having these big families. They start, like avoiding certain worldly things. They change their lives. Why would somebody do that? Why would somebody reject the world for that? And it's almost kind of this evangelization from within. Not because we went out and said, here's the gospel, but rather because they went and they looked and they searched and they kind of, and it's not just the Zoomers, it's across all generations. We had some beautiful conversions in our RCIA class this year that we received into the church on Saturday night. It's not just the Zoomers. But really, it's just this beautiful kind of desire for the truth, kind of looking everywhere and like, well, the world doesn't give me the truth that I need. Politics doesn't give me the truth that I need. Eating Tide Pods doesn't give me the truth that I need. Well, what have people always done when they looked for the truth and when they looked for reason and they turned to God. And what are the examples of those who turn to God? It's the Acts of the Apostles that we hear. That we hear every Easter. We read through the Acts of the Apostles. Because we recognize that there is truth there. We recognize that there is something good there. So as we continue in this octave of Easter, let us continue to rededicate ourselves to being disciples of Christ, recognizing that in our baptism we have died with Christ, we have risen with Christ. We are made one with Christ so that we may be with him forever in heaven.